Okay, the section title is Binding FIDO Authentication with a Digital Identity, Accountable Digital Identity Association Update. We have two speakers for this session, Avi Barber, co-founder of ADIA Association, and Ralph Linderman, Vice President Product of Knock Knock. Please welcome them.
So, welcome back after the break, and good afternoon. So, we are getting to something exciting now. So, talking more about the digital identity, and you might wonder, FIDO, fast identity online, and in the beginning it was more a fast authentication online. And always the question in the room was, or not always, but often, why identity online? And we said, you will understand later, right? We are focusing on authentication now, and we will get to the identity, and you understand that this needs to be accountable, right? Otherwise we get to fake news and no one knows who published that, and we need to protect against those. We want to make sure the right users are accessing bank accounts, etc. So I want to start with some context, right? So the road we traveled so far is really getting to the interoperable ecosystem for strong and convenient authentication, where identity was really not part of that picture. We always said this is completely separate. You do the ID proofing, KYC, whatever you want, and then you register a FIDO credential, or you start registering the FIDO credential first, and progressively, as you go, you might do progressive identity proofing, even more, whatever, to the level which is exactly needed, or at least needed at that point in time, so the user would understand why you are doing that and forcing him through that. However, there was a feedback we got from many customers, and if you look at that from a security angle, you understand why it is that way. So authentication is what you do on a daily basis multiple times. The ID proofing is what you do once, I would say, in a year at this stage, where you do it rarely, but you have to do that too often because it's an inconvenient process, it's not robust security and everything. And if we stop the attacks on the authentication side, which FIDO impressively does, the attackers will likely focus on the ID proofing side. And by the way, that's something we have seen, especially in the COVID times, that account opening fraud was skyrocketing because ID proofing wouldn't be performed in the right way. So we worked in the ADIA Association for specs for claim sharing, and that is what we presented. Then we got to sync credentials. That is as of last year, right, end of last year, which I presented already. Now we are talking about pluggable passkey providers. We are talking about security evidence for device-bound keys, right, which gives us more, like the provenance discussion. We have the transaction confirmation and SPC getting mainstream, hopefully coming soon, right? Those are aspirational items, but that's what I see coming next. Right? Then we would see security evidence, hopefully for passkey providers, also part of the current discussion, use security keys, right, the hybrid model and smartphones for doing SPC on other devices. But then, in my opinion, we need to really get to a point where it becomes obvious that what passkey providers do today brings identity into the FIDO ecosystem. If you look back what FIDO Alliance has done, working with the identity and proofing and binding working group, right, with the DocAuth program and even beyond that, we focus on the identity proofing, identity verification process, how it is done today, and how can we improve and increase the security baseline of that. But with a passkey provider, we see that if you as a user, you have lost all your devices, now you want to get your passkeys back to be restored on a new device you just purchased, that passkey provider somehow needs to verify it's really you, right? It's really you that wants those credentials back on your phone, as opposed to an attacker getting your credentials back on the attacker's phone, right? So the ID proofing comes into play at latest at that point in time, and now we can really say it's fast identity online, it's a FIDO Alliance. But we will get to and see why now, looking at what verifiable claims and how to share those have to do with passkey providers, you need to know the identity of the user. You are collecting some attributes, like authentication credential attributes, if you will, as opposed to identity attributes. But the process you are doing, the thing which is the level of engagement you are asking the user to do are very similar. And so I think those approaches are, on the passkey and provider side, are very successful today for multiple reasons, and we can leverage a lot of that when we get to the reusable identity and learn from that. Some examples up front here. Passkey providers are so great because the APIs to use them are standardized for the relying parties. They know there's always a passkey provider on a device, compared to identity wallets, where you don't know which wallet you have, what kind of API service they expose, and whether it's even there or not. And those handling aspects, right, of those wallets are a huge burden, and that is the reason why many new alliances have been formed to come up with standardization on that, to reduce that burden for the user. And for me, this is where the two approaches, right, will likely converge, where we can learn a lot from what we have done with passkey providers in the FIDO Alliance to get to interoperable ecosystem for reusable identity. Which finally gets us to a nicer way in the internet, like what I would call the e-promised land. Now, you might say, okay, many accounts do not really need your identity. And that's true. I would say roughly 90% of my accounts today are cloud storage account, media accounts. They don't care who I am. They sometimes care that I'm viewing their ads, right, to get it financed, or I'm paying them money. They want my money, but they don't care about my identity. Whether I pay it or someone else pays it, they don't care. Right? But some really care about my identity, and some of them are even regulated to care about my identity. Banks are one example, payment services providers are another one. So sometimes I cannot be the dog on the internet, and people have to know that, and that is good, and this is where we need accountability, so we can't do fake things. And in reality, right, my identity follows in real life. There's a life cycle to that. I start at my birth creation, where the government somehow gives me some kind of approval, right? The government endorsed name, right? So my name has been published to the government. There's a birth certificate in most countries that I know, which somehow prove that I exist and I am known by the government, and no one else is known by the same identity attributes, meaning typically my first name, last name, place of birth, date of birth, right? And those attributes. So there is a lot of things which go along with that. There are other things which might be added, and sometimes people want to get those attributes later, right? Then over the course of my life, student life, I get a birth, based on the birth certificate, I get school diplomas, whatever things I get from other entities which are kind of endorsed by the government or not endorsed, independent, right? I collect those, but they always tie it back to my identity so that no one else could claim to have those diplomas that I really earned and not the others. So they are somehow go back, and most of those attributes really go back to my identity attributes, the core identity attributes, as opposed to just my, I'm over 18, right, which is kind of anonymous, anyone could be, or many people are over 18 these days, especially in our aging countries. But let's talk about those core identity attributes first, and how we get accountability back into that space, and how do we make it easy to share those attributes, and most importantly, how to add robust security. That's another thing you might remember on my first slide. There was in the bottom right corner, there was robust security is needed as a foundation. If you go back, that was the issue, what we had in legacy authentication so far, right? Passwords, phishing attacks, right, could bypass them. OTPs, phishing attacks could bypass them. That is not robust, meaning those authentication methods we had were good until they were attacked, right? And this is very similar to what we use for ID proofing these days, mostly like knowledge-based authentication, right? A call center agent asks you for your mother's maiden name. Those attributes are not secret, and they are not robust under attack, meaning if someone really wants to impersonate you, they will be able to do that if you are only using those kind of methods. So why reusable identity? Get back to that. So when I create an account today, I do some kind of ID proofing. It could be a lightweight, like just, okay, this is my email address, I get something back, click on a link, it's a magic link thing. Right, so they know they can reach me through that email address, and somehow it's a lightweight ID proofing, so they can tie an email address attribute to my identity and they don't care about my name, right? Could be Mickey Mouse as the email address. Who cares? Then I register a derived credential, which FIDO essentially is, and I use that and I get back strong authentication, right? But the pain is now if I change devices, if I create accounts, I always have to go through that painful ID proofing process again and again for each account individually. And most importantly, they typically, these days, DocAuth as an example, collect a copy of my picture ID, which is limited privacy, even if they only would need to know my age, right? They would collect data which goes beyond that. They might store it. It's a separate entity, right? Potentially even running those things. So the privacy impact becomes obvious. Usability impact becomes obvious. And I, as a user, don't want to do that. And especially if I move to a new device, I do not want to do it again for most accounts, at least for the most relevant accounts like bank accounts, which typically have a high burden for me to move to new devices and register those as trusted. Kind of things we are addressing with the finger swipe and passkey providers in FIDO. Some we do not address today. And this is where really the ID proofing process individually per account becomes a burden and creating those, and it's a long time. So what we really want is to have some kind of reusable identity. In the ideal world, some kind of identity hub where I do the ID proofing once and then have electronic means, right, to share exactly the attributes that are needed and nothing else with those relying parties in an electronic way. Some countries got there through national ID cards. Most countries in the world didn't. The question is, what would we do in those countries, right? What can we do here to reduce onboarding time complexity, to give those identity providers an incentive, right, to share such data without selling the data on the market, and then how to get to robust security that is even robust under attack in that ecosystem. So if someone attacks my system, right, they cannot breach and impersonate me. And it needs to be inclusive, right, make device change easy, and those other things we need. And we do not want a central database with all the biometric data for various risk reasons, right? Those could be breached, could be nice attack targets. We don't want to do that, and most relying parties do not want to operate those because of the associated risk with that. So with that, I hand over to Abby, which walks you through the rest.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ralph. So end of the day, the identity broker or identity hub will start playing a good role in facilitating the interoperability and actually the governance type-based systems. Why we need to do that? If you look at it from a user perspective, eventually the user will have a wallet and it will have a verifiable credential. The way the verifiable credential specifications are written today, they are really complex. There is a lot of variations and a lot of options within a verifiable credential. It's a general purpose data model that wants to cover a lot of use cases. And I think to bootstrap this, we need to simplify. So meaning from on both parties. A user should be able to interact with the wallet and not bound to a specific wallet on a specific device. From a user perspective, it's a verifiable credential that should live across multiple devices with different wallets of their choosing. So portability is very important. From a verifier perspective, we need to be able to trust the credential issuer, but also minimize the role of trusting the wallet, because the wallet, if it becomes an arbiter of truth, we fail, because now the adoption will be harder. The verifier has to trust the credential issuer and also the verifiable presentations. So how can we do this? We need to solve that at a minimal level, which is basically let's have a credential that's atomic, that's portable, and make sure from the get-go, the way the things are done, the user can have minimum PII in the credential to bootstrap most of what they want, and then let the part of the ecosystem as a governance ecosystem, in particular the broker of identity, to do further attestations. Why we need to do that? You don't need to wait for maturing zero-knowledge proof technology. The verifiable presentation become like a policy execution, which is very tough for compliance, and is not good for the adoption. So the idea going forward is let's keep it simple and let's ensure interoperability is there. The credential subject, the subject ID is easy discoverable, and also the issuer will become trusted issuer within the domain or the industry that you are in. There is no global governance ecosystem for this to work. There are going to be system of systems, and people will start trusting credentials issued by providers per their industry and what makes sense to them. And so I'm finishing all of it, Ralph, from 9. Okay. So how we do that? You wanted to make sure that the ID of the person, the first onboarding, is done in a way where we can say this person is real. So you need, like when Ralph did talk about your digital life, when you get born in a hospital, you get attested by a doctor and a birth certificate, and this becomes your core foundation. After that, all of your identities or other stuff are based on a core component that you are real, you are not fake. And we need the same equivalence in the digital world. So ADIA has the concept of a digital address. The digital address basically it's a mean to say based on core documents and assurance level that you as an entity do exist. And this is not really used after that. It's a reference that that entity is there, but after that you can use DID to do your different personas. But the DID is anchored on something real. Okay, you are not, a robot or a bot. And this is a core foundation in the trust ecosystem that we want to provide. So where we are in this journey. So ADIA has done first specification, and we published the first version 1.0. We got good feedback from the industry, but the way we structured the specification was a big document that has everything in it. And Ralph did take a close look at it, and he said, guys, you need to simplify. So what we did is now we split it into 3 different documents. So we are doing it in terms of a verifier or point of view, how it should, what they need to adopt it, from an issuer perspective, what they need to adopt it, from a user perspective and wallet interaction, how you need to do it. So we're splitting it into deployable type, okay? So this is where we are. We have a couple of implementations. We have deployments. CVS did have 1 deployment out of it. So we are getting, real life experience with it. And when, based on the previous slide that I showed you, we came to a conclusion that if the verifiable credential is not atomic and easy to consume, it becomes the bottleneck because it becomes too complex. So we spun the Oasis Lightweight Verifiable Credential and Schema Process TC, which I did give a presentation about it at the 9:30 this morning, and ADIA contributing on it, and the idea behind it is we are focusing on interoperability and the plug-and-play type solution. A lot of the decisions in that TC has been based on using OpenID, JOT token, and verifiable credential in JOT format. The schema will be based on the IANA for JOT. We're doing OpenID identity assurance reference, which is compliant with what NIST is doing. But what we're doing with the credential has no optional attributes in it. So you have template 1, template 2, template 3 based on a given assurance level. So a verifier up from the beginning, once they're going to get the credential based on the JOT token metadata, header data, they know upfront what to expect. So it's, I know you're going to fit in my ecosystem or not. End of the day, you're going to live on the database of your verifier. So you better be like you have what they need. Otherwise, they're going to keep asking you questions. And we need to minimize that. The whole ecosystem, the way it goes trust, if the verifier need additional attestation, the way the broker can do it with triple blind issue, you can get attestation from the issuer. Are you really a resident of New York or not? Are you really over 21 or not? Without relying on the wallet to do a zero-knowledge proof to make the attestation for you instead of sending your date of birth or your physical address. And so we simplify that because if you trust the issuer will be part of the database for data pass for attestation. So how we could do that? We needed to do this in a way that's plug and play, mimic the ecosystem plus of real life. And we did not want to rely on specific ledgers. So our architecture, the way it's done with the digital address, is very similar to a DNS system. You have a digital address service provider, and you get a redirect onto it. They know how to resolve your address. They get DIDs, and those DIDs are this one single-use DID, so your privacy is assured. The authentication to the wallet is through passkey, and stronger authentication, if you want, through biometric, and it's plug and play. So basically, every member in that ecosystem, from the issuer to the verifier, are certified through a subscription type system. So it's trust type anchor with systems. And what we wanted to do is there is no rip and replace. It's an overlay. It's an API call. And if you already have your IAM system, the verification component through decentralization comes through an extra call. And then we go back to what Ralph is saying. The identity broker is one entry point. From a user perspective, you only get validated ones, you get your credential ones. From a relying or verifier perspective, you have a point of federation. You just send the user to an end validation. You get back a strong identity and authentication token that bind both of them. It's very good with what we're doing with passkeys because passkey is account related, it's not really identity. But any passkey provider can give higher assurance on the passkey recovery by binding it through an identity at recovery time. So you can add that all of that extra stuff, as a service. So we are global. We are talking to other organizations for extending ADI, and we're going to have announcement as we come forward. So the way we're going, we are going to have a proper, strong relationship with multiple organizations, and we're going to become much more global, hopefully within the next 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so we'll make an announcement. So the idea behind it is the center of gravity and trust will be within an ecosystem. Healthcare platform providers will have issuers that when you want to consume their credential, you trust the issuer because they are in the healthcare and so forth. It becomes system of systems. But it's DNS-like based. There is no reliance on a specific ledger. There is no reliance on a specific DID method because the way the architecture works, as in the previous, your digital address provider or your broker will resolve the DID method for you. So you, as a relying party or a verifier, don't really need to worry about how to resolve there is no need for a universal resolver, basically. And I think that's it. We're done.
So we have 2 questions online submitted. Number 1, is the idea to really apply this across service providers like LexisNexis and similar providers?
Did you get the question? Could you repeat that? Because I didn't understand.
Okay, I'll try again. Is the idea to really apply this across service providers like LexisNexis and similar providers?
So the idea of ADIA is to have issuers of identity attributes and not necessarily create new ones. So the ones that already have identity attributes, allow them to participate and share their identity attributes in a robust way with service providers which might want to use those as part of account creation, recovery processes, or other things. So that's the fundamental idea there, to have one interoperable ecosystem for these reusable identity attributes.
Okay, moving on to question number 2. When do you see widespread adoption of ADI? Which companies are the primary parties that need to adopt to make sure it is used by everyone?
We have some pilots and proof of concepts, and I think the secret for adoption is to start with the common use case. And I think we will, like the way ADIA did so far, we wanted to mature the specification with a small pilot as proof of concept. And once the next version of the specification come out, we'll be focusing more into adoption and deployment. We were like, this is very similar to when we started the FIDO Alliance. Like the core founders of ADIA came from the FIDO Alliance. And the first 18 months of FIDO, it was limited focus and get the first specification out. And it took 18 months to do that, right, Ralph? After that, when it became bigger, it took 7 years for version 2. So ADIA did not want to go into 7 years to have version 1. We wanted version 2 quickly, right? So by next year, hopefully, we'll be able to start opening it more and get more deployment. We have a lot of interest at this stage, and we are being walk, do not run, and we need to make sure our specs are deployable, and this is why we are rewriting them.
Okay, thanks. So we're out of time. So perhaps Rolf, Abby, closing thoughts, please.
So I think it's great to see first that the way we solve authentication and the security challenges with that has really taken off, right? And we see more progress to that. Now, it is important to not forget the ID proofing aspect of that. So we need to do a very similar effort, in my opinion, to achieve the same goal of robust security, which is convenient to use for everyone. And this is what we have presented, or one approach we have presented, and please follow us and support us continuing that path.
Yeah, come join us. Thank you.